Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome officially to the webinar today. This is our monthly webinar, the Talent Lens Success Magnified, where we focus on talent topics and highlight CS and PS leaders. And we're so glad that you're here today. I'm Swati Garg. I'm the CEO of Neil Associates. And we focus on customer success and professional services recruitment. We do all levels in North America within SaaS and technology. And so if you want to chat about that, I would love to. But I'll share a little bit more about me and a topic and Arit, and then we'll get going. Next slide, please. So as you know, I'm Swati. I went to the University of Illinois. I don't know if there's any Illini in the house. Obviously, ooh, I didn't realize that, Arit. That's
Oh,
awesome. That's exciting. ILL. Um, and I started my own personal brand last year, really all around like focus on action and really um, making progress towards your goals. So if anyone wants to talk to me about that, I'm happy to do that. And then have been in this space for almost 8 years and really love what I do and love what I'm doing. So if anybody ever wants to talk about entrepreneurship, CS, hiring, PS, any of that, please let me know. I am so excited about the webinar today. Erin and I have known each other for years. We actually partnered and collaborated on a speaking event February 2020, so right before the pandemic, which was wild. And this is the next one we've been able to do. And this topic is so important because we get asked about people who've been in people management that want to go back into an individual contributor role all the time. They ask questions about their career, compensation, if this is going to be a step back. There's so many different things that come up with wanting to make this decision. And yeah, as we know, everyone doesn't want to be a people manager, and everyone shouldn't be a people manager. So I think there's a lot of conversation around that, and I'm really excited to hear Erit's experience and perspective today. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but we are so excited to talk about this today. So I'm going to hand it to you, and we'll go from there.
thanks, Swati.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to do a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. Actually, let me talk about who I am first, so you know who's babbling to you. I don't know where it went. There I am. Hi. My name is Arit Nsemo. I have been in customer success for just under 15 years. So before it was actually called customer success, I was in customer success roles, which has given me like a really interesting perspective on the industry because so much of it has changed over the course of the many years that I've been involved. So I've primarily worked at tech companies, and I've taken on both leadership positions and senior level individual contributor roles across e-commerce, tech recruiting, IoT, education technology. So broad range of industries, but pretty much always in CS. I think it's really important to build teams with mindfulness, trust, and transparency in mind. Otherwise, it just doesn't work out. I'm from Chicago, and I'm actually sitting in California right now because I'm actually on site for customer meetings this week in San Diego and LA. But I love to read and I love to travel typically, and you'll probably hear me do it today. If you talk to me for more than about 20 minutes, I will bring up and reference some book that has been read in my world in the recent memory. So just a heads up, I love to read. So if you want to talk about reading, I am here for it. Let me go backwards here if I can. There we go. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about basically, let me give a quick overview. So something that comes up a lot when I'm talking to CS pros, because I do a lot of mentorship and coaching, and obviously I have a team now. There's a lot of questions around what the career paths are in CS. And CS has, because it's still a relatively new discipline, career pathing is really all over the place in customer success. I'm sure that anyone who has been in a CS role at a company can attest to the fact that there's not a lot of structure a lot of the time, especially when you're working in startups and scale ups. And so it kind of leaves CS professionals in a bit of a place of limbo about where they can go, what they can do next, what's open to them. And it's not necessarily about climbing a ladder. So today we're going to talk about how can you make clear-headed decisions about your career when it comes to the types of roles you want versus when it comes to manager versus individual contributor. We'll talk about some non-linear career paths in CS, which I would consider my career path in customer success non-linear. So I'll actually frame the conversation around my story because it's the easiest way for me to pull things in. And then I'll talk specifically about how, if you are in a leadership position or management position, how to frame a shift from management back to individual contributor during the recruitment process or any internal conversations you're having, right? So, like, for example, right now I actually have someone on my team who is in more of a lead role and is actually curious about moving into an IC role. And that's a really scary thing to kind of say out loud, because the instant thing that comes up is your ego. And then, well, for me at least, it was my ego. And am I taking a step back in my career? And so I want to assure you, before we get into anything else, taking an IC position after being in a management position is definitely not a step back in your career. Your career is yours to build. So without further ado, let's jump into kind of what I have seen happen in my career and how I think that it can apply across the board for other folks who are trying to make this decision about what should my next step be in customer success. The other thing to note is that customer success is very much one of those roles in a company where you touch a lot of things. So you are involved with the product, you're involved with sales, you're involved with marketing, you're involved with engineering, you're involved with support, you're involved with implementation. And so one of the ways that you can move around in CS is actually to leverage the experience you've gotten as a customer success manager and branch out into other areas of the business as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But here is my career path. It is non-linear. It's really not linear. So I started my first ever customer success job was at a company called CapEx. It was a kind of marketing platform that got but put high school students in front of colleges that would be a good match for them. I started there as an individual contributor, and then I moved into a manager position, and I managed there for a couple of years. And then after a certain point, I started to get that itch. I'm sure everyone is familiar with it. It looks different for everyone. For me, it was if there's not a lot of growth opportunities internally, or if the product is no longer something that I feel really connected to, I kind of start to get the vibe that I might need to move on. And I started to feel that way, and I started to kind of just poke around and look at other positions in Chicago. And I discovered a role that was labeled customer success director, which I initially thought was a director level position because I was in a director level position at CapEx. And I reached out to the recruiter and they were like, oh, actually, that's what we call our CSM. So it was an IC role. And I was like, you know what? I'm actually still interested. And I hadn't actually at that point considered going from a director level position to an IC because it seemed like a crazy thing to do. I was like, oh, I'm on this path this way. I have to stay this way. But I met with the team and I had a conversation and I loved the product and I got really good vibes from the culture. And so I took the leap and joined as an individual contributor at Power Reviews, which was great because I got to sit in the seat and help build out the team. I was one of two CSMs at the time. And so any kind of process things, any of the stuff that we needed to do to build up the customer success org, I was really intimately involved in. And so this was my first experience where I would say I was like kind of leading from any seat. I had the leadership experience, and so I could bring that skill set with me to the IC role, but I was also in the weeds and can see actually what customers were looking for, what they needed, and make recommendations to leadership that were taken into account as we built out the company. And so from there, I moved into a leadership position. I moved into a manager of enterprise customer success position. So I was managing a team of enterprise CSMs. I loved it. I was setting goals. I was doing all the one-on-ones. I was doing the performance reviews. I was handling escalations. And I wasn't burnt out on leadership. I was really enjoying it, but something really incredible came up. And I'm going to put an asterisk here as because we'll talk a little bit about decision-making frameworks, like how to decide if management is right for you, if IC work is right for you, and how that can change depending on where you are in your career. Just because you want to lead right now doesn't mean you're going to want to lead in 5 years. It doesn't mean you're going to want to be an IC in 5 years either. But I think that this is really important to check in with yourself. So I was offered the opportunity to take on a role actually in London, leading, basically managing all of our European customers, and it would be an IC role. And I remember sitting down with my chief people officer at the time and her telling me, hey, you're a great fit for this, but I just want to make sure you're okay with the fact that you will no longer be a people manager. And I was like, actually, yeah, I'm okay with that. And at the time, it did feel a little like a loss. Like I was really enjoying people management at that time, but I had to balance my real goals and what I wanted. And I'd always dreamed of working abroad, and this was my opportunity. So if it meant that I wouldn't be managing people, that felt okay to me. And so I stepped back into an IC role at Power Reviews. And for the last 2.5 years that I was there, I was a senior CSM. So I went from customer success manager to manager of enterprise customer success to senior CSM, all in one company. And then from there, I went from IC to leadership, which is where you think you're supposed to go, right? Like that's the direction. And I joined Built-in as director of customer success, which Built-in is a Chicago tech company. Um, that was a great position. I loved the company and culture. And then this was the first time that I can say that I started to feel really burnt out on leadership itself. And part of that was circumstantial. I'd had a personal loss right before I started that job. So I was in a different headspace. And also, I joined Built-in September of 2019, which meant that I was there when the pandemic started. And I really struggled with having to have meetings back to back when all of this stuff was going on in the world. So one of the asterisks I'll put here is that being in management often means you're going to have way more meetings internally. I understand as a CSM, you're going to have meetings with customers, right? You have a little bit more control of that. Internal meetings really can eat up your calendar, especially when you're in a leadership role. And that was definitely the case for me. I was in meetings basically from 8:30 to 5 every day. I had Zoom fatigue. I was exhausted. And it was the first time that I started to really notice some of the things about people management that were not super exciting to me. And things like only talking to customers when they're angry with you, right? Like you are handling escalations most of the time and they're not happy when they've escalated to you. Things like really having tough conversations with my team when they were off their goals, goal tracking, all of the admin work of management and leadership started to kind of weigh on me there in a way that it hadn't before. And I was actually really surprised. And it took me kind of a while to realize um, what was actually happening. And so I kind of started to look for jobs. I was like, maybe I'll start to look. And I started to kind of search for director and VP level positions in customer success. And then something in me pulled back and was like, I don't know. I think I need to sit here for a second and think about this. And so this is where I did a really, really valuable exercise. I sat down and I did a values exercise to determine what was actually important to me in a role and what was important to me in life. And then from that, I wrote my own job description for like the ideal position in terms of what I would be doing, what I could learn, what kind of product I wanted to work with. And with that information, I was like, oh, actually, I think that I might want to be an IC again. It was the first time that it had really sprung into my mind because at that point, I thought I'm on the management path. And so, lucky for me, I had an opportunity to join an organization called Hologram, also a Chicago tech company. And the only position available was a senior level IC. So it was a senior CSM role at Hologram. And I was like, you know what? I know I'm not sure. I was still battling with my ego. I was still like, well, I don't know. Is this a step back in my career? And this is when I knew that it was the right call. I started Googling. Anytime you're Googling something that you already know to be true in your heart, like, it's right. That's when you know, right? So I started Googling, like, is it okay to move from manager to individual contributor? And the only articles that came up were about engineering managers, because this is actually a phenomenon in engineering where engineers that are really, really good at coding get promoted to management and are actually like, wait, I miss coding. I want to create stuff. And so they tend to go backwards more often than in other kind of areas. And so that's all that came up was engineering articles. And I was like, well, I'm not an engineer. And so I actually wrote an article about this process after the fact. I'll share it. But I sat down with the Hologram team and we walked through the role. And this was the first time that I had to truly frame the reasoning why I wanted to move from a director level position at a reputable company that I actually really enjoyed. I loved the people, I respected the product, to an individual contributor position. And it was really challenging because I got on the phone on the interview with the VP of revenue at Hologram at the time, and he really grilled me on why I wanted to take this role, because there is a risk in the hiring process between recruiters and hiring managers that if they hire someone who was a manager into an IC role, what if they get bored? What if it's not what they want? And then they've got to deal with turnover down the line. So they really want to de-risk the situation. And we'll talk a little bit about in depth about what I did to do that. But I was very clear about what I wanted. I moved into Hologram as a senior CSM. So I went from director of customer success to senior customer success manager. And then I moved into leadership at that company after about a year and a half due to a RIF, a reduction in force. And they asked if I wanted to lead and voluntold a little bit. And I'm grateful for it because it was a different type of leadership than what I'd had at Built-In and than what I'd had at Power Reviews and that what I'd had at CapEx. And so this is the other thing that I'll put like a pin on is that leading at one company is not the same as leading at another. You might be burnt out because of company culture, which when I think of company culture, I also think of like operational cadence, like how do they communicate internally, things like that, not just, ping pong tables and fun lunch and learns. And so I actually really enjoyed leading at Hologram. And I had access to really senior level leaders. I had really good mentorship. I had really good coaching. I was doing really in-depth forecasting and stuff that I hadn't had to learn before. It was a very different product and industry. So I was quite engaged in the process. After a certain point, though, I was like, you know what, it's time to move on. And my next step was SearchSpring, which is where I am now. So I moved from director of customer success at Hologram to senior director of customer success at SearchSpring, which I am now. So that's kind of my journey and my story. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about how anyone can really frame these decisions and kind of decide what is actually best for them. Because in the end, we are really influenced by the world, of course, right? That's always been true, but especially now because you can't open your phone or open LinkedIn or open your email or go to work without being bombarded by so many different types of messaging about what you should be doing. If I had $1 for every article that I was like, 5 foods you should be eating, 5 career moves you should make, I don't believe in should. I think that everyone crafts their own narrative and their own career. And it's really hard to block out all that noise and get to a space of clear-headedness, which is you need to be in a space of clear-headedness in order to make any of these decisions, because otherwise you might get swallowed up by all the expectations of the people around you. So here's what I kind of think about when I think of framing the move from a manager to an individual contributor. And this works both if you're doing it internally. So I went from manager to IC internally at Power Reviews, or externally when I went from manager to individual contributor from Built-In to Hologram. So answer the question for yourself. Why do you want to step away from leadership and people management? Answer that question. Before you talk to anyone else about it, journal about it, get really quiet, meditate about it, whatever it takes. But it's really important that you answer that question for yourself first and that you answer it honestly before you tell anyone else and let them have a response to you that may not necessarily align with what you actually care about. The second thing is tell a story. So when I was interviewing at Hologram and I was getting grilled by that VP of revenue about why I actually wanted to step away from a director position and go to senior CSM, I told my story. I told him, I was really honest. I told him that I'd had a personal loss. I told him that I was burnt out. I told him that I cared about culture. And I told him that I cared about leading from any seat, which is the topic we're talking about today. And when he asked what I meant by that, I told him that I felt really strongly that even in the weeds of day-to-day management with customers and jumping on business reviews and escalating things to product and leadership, I would have my leadership hat on in spirit, where I could start to identify certain things that were going on in a customer's org or in our org that required us to make process changes. And I would vocalize that to my leaders. And if they trust me, they might take my advice or take my thoughts and we move forward. And so I really framed it as I feel strongly that I could lead from anywhere. I don't need to manage people in order to feel like I'm a leader. And that really resonated because that company culture aligned with that kind of methodology and that mindset. And then be prepared to speak to what's important to you. So when I'm talking to, like, I have people on my team who have come to me and said, I don't know if I want to manage anymore. Something that happens a lot, I don't know if you've noticed this, is that if you're really good at your job, they're like, hey, do you want to manage a team? And if you say, you feel like you can't say no. I feel like a lot of people feel that they can't be like, no, I don't want to lead. I don't want to manage, because I think it reflects poorly on them, and it doesn't. One of the hardest things that I had to do was admit that I didn't really like the admin and tedium of being a people manager. That sucks to say out loud to someone. It sucks to say out loud to yourself. Like, I didn't like having back-to-back one-on-ones. I didn't like sometimes being a therapist for my team, which now I feel much better about. But I didn't like, getting in compensation disputes with the people team when my team wanted a raise. Like those things felt really hard to me at a certain point in my career. And I had to admit that to myself. So I think being prepared to speak to what's really important to you is going to go a really long way when you're trying to frame these conversations. Because, like I said before, recruiters, hiring managers, they respond to confidence. They respond to you feeling very set and clear headed about your decision and what you want next, because that's what they want to see in someone who's joining their team. So be prepared to speak to what's important to you and be honest about what that is. And then do your research on comp. This is such a critical step. Customer success comp is literally all over the place. I mean, at all the places I have worked, there's been a totally different comp structure. I've seen everything from fully transparent pay to comped against this and this, to seniority level, to years of experience in the company versus outside of the company. It is all over the place. And managers and ICs are typically comped differently. Now, I will say this. I believe very strongly that people managers and leaders should be comped similarly to people who are very senior level strategic individual contributors. I think there needs to be two pathways that are clear, and very rarely is that the case at companies. So often people want to get a raise and they want to move up, and so they just jump into management because they think like, oh, there's no way I'll get more money just staying in the individual contributor pathway. I don't think that is true. I did one time I went for manager IC, I took a pay cut, but that pay cut worked out because in the end I ended up earning more because I moved up and because the comp plans changed and because I ended up being a manager again, that, everything worked out. And this is a question you just really need to ask yourself in terms of what you can manage when it comes to comp, but make sure you research really heavily what you expect for comp. And I don't believe that you need to take a pay cut in order to go from manager to IC. I only did one time and it was by like a tiny, like literally tiny percent. And it was on bonus, not base. And so I was willing to take that risk. But this is something that you need to understand within yourself. And so if you are like, I'm tired of managing, say you're in your current org, you're tired of managing a team, but you want to be a senior IC, I would argue that your comp should stay at least the same in terms of that. Because the work is just as important. It's just a different type of work and it should be comped accordingly. So let's talk a little bit about decision frameworks. This is how you get clear-headed. And the way to do that is you align your decision-making to your values. I am not saying anything new here. This is kind of the holy grail of how to make decisions, aligning them to your values. I don't know if anyone has heard the phrasing, show me what you spend your money on and I'll show you what you care about, right? Like if you spend a lot of money on travel, your values might be adventure and freedom. If you spend a lot of money on your children, they might be family and nurturing. If you spend a lot of money on, I don't know, shoes, maybe the value is like beauty and fashion and art. So really think about what your values are. And I recommend doing a values exercise for this. Brene Brown has a really good one that I love because it forces you to pare your values down to just two. Because often we see values and we're like, yeah, I'm adventurous. I like freedom. I care about autonomy. I like relationships. I care about health and wellness. And those are all things that are probably true. But in order for us to get to a clear-headed space about how we're deciding our next move in our career, we need to know what the core values are. And usually I say to limit that to three. So what I do is write down, and this is exactly what I did when I was deciding if I wanted to step back from leadership after built-in and going into hologram. I wrote down what was most important to me. I was like, here's what I care about. I wrote down what was important to me, that things like freedom, flexibility, autonomy, good company culture. I wrote down my values, which were at the time autonomy, adventure, and like health and wellness. And then I aligned those most important things to the values in terms of it. And I wrote down an actual job description. So I wrote the qualities of a role that align with the above. And those qualities could be in a manager role, or they could be in an IC role. But typically, it'll start to come to the surface when you see things like, I really don't like giving people really critical feedback. That's like, I don't like doing it. I don't want to do it. Then you shouldn't be in people management. Or like, I really want to drive strategy for customer accounts. That's really, it like lights me up. that's something you're not going to be able to do as much when you're in people leadership, right? You're going to guide and advise, but you're not necessarily going to be driving that. That's going to be your CSM. So that gives you indication that individual contributor is better for you. So this is how you get to a clear-headed space, determining what your values are and making decisions based off your values that align with your values. Do you want to manage? Do you actually want to manage? This is a question I've again asked myself. These are the 4 questions that I really hone in on. There's a lot more that goes to it, but these are the ones I hone in on. Do I like lots of meetings? You often, as a leader, get a little bit lost in terms of meetings. Meetings get thrown on your calendar. So you do tend to have an uptick in meetings once you become a manager. Do you like setting goals for people and keeping them on track? Do you like the admin side of management? I've mentioned this already. Do you like performance reviews? Do you like PTO, giving people, approving people's PTO? Do you like managing their goals? Do you like having one-on-ones? Do you like dealing with customer escalations? Do you like having comp conversations with HR on behalf of your team? There's a lot of admin work to being a people manager, and sometimes that can burn you out. And then can you handle giving bad news? This is a key one. You have to be able to give coaching and constructive feedback. And sometimes those are really not fun conversations to have, valuable and necessary, but not fun. And some people really clam up and struggle with them, and then they don't have them. And then they're actually moving into not being a great people manager because they're not working on their people to make them better. So a couple questions to ask yourself if you actually want to manage or not. And then this is the leading from any seat, right? So like bringing it all home here, speak up. I'll give an example. When I joined Hologram, I noticed that I've been there for a few months, and I noticed that we didn't have a call recording software. And Hologram had a very technical product that was really hard to get up to speed on and hard for new employees to onboard on. And we weren't recording any of our calls so that new people could listen to them or so managers could coach. And so I was like, hey, have we thought about investing in a call recording tool? Like, how would we get budget for that? I brought that up to my manager. He's like, oh, I'm not sure, but if you put together a proposal, like we can work on it. And so I did. I wrote something up. I sent a few options based off of who I'd worked with in the past. And then I got approval for the budget on it. And I was the one that actually went through the selection process and picked the vendor that we ended up working with and implementing. And that's something a manager would usually do. That's not something a senior CSM would usually do. But because I was like, hey, I see a thing, here's what I think we could do about it. And then I was trusted enough to do it. I was able to take kind of a leadership role in that moment, even though I was an IC. Another way to do it is taking the lead on cross-functional work. So this is my favorite way to uncover if you're kind of like, oh, I don't really know what my next step is, but I don't know if I want to even be in CS anymore. Happens a lot, but you have access to all these other teams as a CSM. So when there is cross-functional work, like maybe there's a project that revenue operations is running, or maybe there's something going on with product, volunteer to be the person who joins those meetings instead of your manager. One, that takes it off your manager's plate, and we love that. And 2, it gives you access to what the other teams are doing, their processes, how they think about it. And maybe you're like, actually, I really like RevOps. What would I need to do to move into that kind of area? Acting as a SME for an internal product is a really great way to kind of step in and lead from any seat, especially if you're the one who volunteers to build enablement materials or do team trainings. Once you've learned the tool, you share it with the rest of your team. And then volunteering for webinars. Love this one. Not only do you get access to the marketing team when you do this and like kind of understand what their process is for something like putting on a webinar, which is typically a key driver for leads and orgs, but you also get like the exposure. And the marketing people are almost always looking for people to be on webinars. So raise your hand, let them know that you're interested and you're available if anyone needs you to lead a webinar. Lastly, protect your energy. Being a CSM is one of those things that can lead to burnout. I have seen so many CSMs burn out, and it's really tough because they're always smart, capable, empathetic, amazing humans. And so in order for any of this to work, in order for you to get clear-headed and decide what you want to do next, in order for you to position yourself, if you want to move from manager to IC or from IC to manager or from CS to another department, you can't do any of that if you're burnt out. It's hard to be clear-headed when you're burnt out because your nervous system is on high alert. You need to resettle yourself. And so I'm going to say it. I say this to everyone all the time. Take your PTO, and don't just like take 1 week and then don't take PTO for 6 months. See when your energy starts to wane and decide that I'm going to take at least this much PTO after this certain period of time. Maybe you don't ever go 6 weeks without a day off work. Set clear boundaries. So this is really important internally. CSMs are often pulled into a bunch of stuff. You can say no. My favorite way to say no, if you need one, feel free to steal this. When someone asks you to do something, I will reply and say, sounds like this is important. I have 3 other high priority things today and this week. I'll have to drop one of those off of my list if I take this on. Is this high enough priority for me to like deprioritize something else? And let that person tell you yes or no. More often than not, they'll be like, oh my gosh, no, this can be done in 2 weeks. But because we live in a culture of urgency, we assume it needs to be done that day, and that's not usually true. It almost always works, because it forces the other person to kind of think about what they're asking you, and it reinstates your boundaries. And then learn how to say no to customers. I'm just going to put this in here because it's just going to help you out if you're sitting in an individual contributor seat, or if you're a manager. Honestly, I even sometimes struggle to say no to customers. Learn how to say no to customers. A like confident no is much more trustworthy than an uncertain yes, right? So if you say yes to something and then you don't deliver, or it doesn't go that well because it's not something you really needed to say yes to in the first place, you're better off just saying no. Customers will trust you more. And that's it.
I'm coming back. Give me 1 second. Okay, thank you so much, Arit. That was amazing. I have so many things that, oh my gosh, I was thinking, and I love the creating your job description. I loved your personal stories. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your actual like career history and process. Man, it was just so good to hear you speak again. That was amazing. So thank you so much. We have so many questions in the chat, which we will get to. I have a few questions for you. So if you could please stop screen sharing, I would love that
Mhm.
so I can see your beautiful face a little bit bigger. And then we can, I'll ask a few questions and then we'll get to your Q&A. So please continue to put questions in the chat. I'm really excited about the conversation today. So I want to kind of dig into more of your personal stories. I think that is really resonating with our audience, and I kind of want to keep going there. So can you share a moment in your career when you felt stuck or unsure about your next move? How did you navigate that period? Could you share a little bit more about that?
Mhm. Yeah, a lot. I feel like I'm stuck a lot. So I think one really interesting thing is, and I talked a little bit about the move from director to IC, but I'll actually talk a little bit more about when I was working abroad in London. I was a senior CSM, and I loved the company, I loved the product, I loved living abroad, but there was literally nowhere for me to go. Like I couldn't move up, I couldn't move anywhere else. I couldn't work for another company in the UK because of my visa. And so I had to really get honest with myself about basically, am I gonna stay here and just kind of almost languish in this role? Because I had the opportunity to stay in London longer and keep living out this dream of living abroad and working abroad. But at that point, I would have really stagnated my career doing that, right? Like I wouldn't have been able to learn and grow at the rate that I wanted to, even though if you would have asked me, if you had asked 17-year-old Arit if you were giving an opportunity to live in London in another 2 years, I would have said yes, no matter what the circumstances. But this time was different. I was like, you know what? I think it might be time for me to move on and like move to a different role, but that means moving back to Chicago. And am I ready for that? And so I felt really stuck. I really felt like I had all the things that I wanted. And sometimes when you get everything you want, you're like, oh crap, there's still other stuff I want. Like, doesn't this stop one day? Like I wish it did. And so I felt really stuck. And then the end, um, what ended up coming up is I just sat down. I was like, this is going to sound really amazing, but I was like sitting on the beach in the south of France on vacation. And I was like, what matters more to me, career advancement or, living it up in London? And the honest truth was at that point in my life, career advancement mattered more. And I just had to trust that if I decided to do that and I really wanted to live abroad and work abroad another time, it would work out. And so far it hasn't because, we lived through a global pandemic and the world blew up a little bit, but you never know. So yeah, that's a good one.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think that sounds like such a hard decision. It's interesting. Like I feel like when you have that growth mindset, right? I think you are one, all of us. Like it's you kind of get to your goals and then you already have created new goals and you don't even realize it, right? And it's it's a struggle. It's a struggle. So I
Yeah.
love. What signs or symptoms did you notice that indicated you were burnt out on leadership? And how did you address those feelings, right? So you mentioned
Mhm.
that you had a moment where you were like, I was burnt out. So how did you know that?
Yeah. I started to dread one-on-ones. That was the first clear sign to me, and I'm an introvert, but I love people. I love relationships. I want people like to advocate. It's one of the things I love about leadership is being an advocate for someone and mentoring and guiding people. And so I used to get a lot of energy from one-on-ones, especially because I had an amazing team. And I started to dread them. I started to be like, oh, I have to get on a call, I have to walk through goals, and I just started to be like, I don't want to do this. And that was my first indication. It was like essentially something that I used to really love and get energy from now felt draining. I was like, that's burnout. That's a real clear sign of burnout to me.
Okay. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Okay. And then what are some ways CS professionals can continue to advance their careers without taking on traditional leadership roles?
Yeah. Um, Staying curious. So the best way to like settle in and lead from any seat is to stay really curious. So take on leading even internal projects like with your team. Take on ask your manager if they can shadow meetings. Like that's a thing that I really feel like people don't do enough. So ask if you can shadow meetings, ask if you can shadow product meetings, ask if you can sit in on RevOps meetings, meetings that are outside of your department and team, even if you're not offering anything to it, just to learn if you have the time. Like, right, everyone's super busy. So I know that this is like kind of a stretch. But that's one real way. And the other way is like really leaning into the community of customer success. I think one of the biggest benefits of being in CS is that if you want to advance your career and grow without moving into management or leadership, there's a lot of opportunity to learn how to do that. And then reach out, and this is like an offshoot of that, having conversations with other people who have stayed as an IC but are very senior is great. I actually really lean on, I have a former colleague, he's a sales professional, but he went into management once and was like, oh no, thank you. I don't want to do this. But he is a very successful account executive and he has not taken on a leadership position since then. And he keeps getting asked all the time. So he's constantly forcing back the issue. And so also talking to people who are in other senior IC roles about the tactics that they've taken to stay out of management and leadership, that's been really helpful in terms of growth and moving into IC, more senior IC roles versus management.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point too, right? Like this is obviously more common in more established and older functions like sales and
Yeah.
engineering. So definitely take, some pages from their book. So I love that.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to go to the Q&A. So if you have more
Okay.
questions, please continue to put them in the Q&A. So, how important is it to balance a personal well-being with professional ambitions, right? And what are your strategies for achieving this balance? I really liked your story about London, and kind of want to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I am one of those people that cares a lot about my career, but I care about my personal life like 400 times more than I do about my career. It doesn't make me any less ambitious, any less goal oriented, any less likely to grow. But I think that if you, as soon as you start to see that decisions you're making for your career are impacting your well being long term, like if you are not getting good enough sleep, if you are not making time for your friends because you're too exhausted at the end of a workday, if you're not able to see your family, that's a downside. And so when I was making my decision about, okay, like, I really want to live in London from a personal perspective, but career-wise, if I do this, like it's not going to work out for me. I also knew I think there's like a bit of a balance you have to understand where like how much of the good outweighs the bad here because no decision is going to be like, yep, cut and dry. I mean, maybe like, do you want to do you want to go swimming with sharks without a cage? That's probably a no, right? There's probably not a lot of positives to that. But the other sides, there's always going to be good and bad to everything. And so you really need to, in your heart, like weigh, like, is the sacrifice worth it? And sacrifice actually originally means to make sacred. And so I think I keep that in my mind a lot because when you're sacrificing something, it's not a bad thing. You're just like, I'm making this, I'm making a choice to make this sacred. Like I am making this the most important thing right now. And you just have to get good at prioritization. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not going to have a, international life anymore. But I am going to learn so much from my career that's also going to help my personal life. And that's exactly what happened. Like, it was the right decision in the end, but it was a hard one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that sounds really challenging. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so we're gonna kind of go back to the Q&A. We have some amazing questions here. The first one is, how do you, and you know, you obviously have talked about this a little bit, so let me know obviously if you have more to add to this, but
Mhm.
how does one best position themselves to transition to an IC role when they have been a leader for years? Is it,
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that's tough. It is really hard. I'm not going to minimize that. So the first thing is I always tell people to post on LinkedIn as a way of like getting their word out there. Not everyone's comfortable with that, but definitely update your resume to highlight the things. And I did this when I was moving into an IC role. Update your resume to highlight the things that you did as an IC or the things that you did as a leader that translate really directly with individual contributor work. That's one thing. That's a huge thing. The other thing is, again, saying the reasons why you want to move out of leadership and saying them honestly. So I think you can even say, after 5 years of being a leader, I've realized that I have put myself in a position where I'm not actually operating to the best of my strengths. And my strengths really lie with IC work, and give examples. Like, I love the strategy aspect of leading customers to their goals. I really want to be a part of XYZ. I care a lot about hitting goals on an individual level. Like, those things really drive me. So pull out things that ICs typically do and talk about how they really impact you and how you're good at those things and actually you prefer those things. I think if I'm a hiring manager, because obviously I'm coming from a different kind of mindset, but hearing is someone has the self-awareness to be like, hey, I've actually like not been doing the thing I want to do for 5 years and I'm ready to do the thing I want to do now. That's really powerful. And I think people respond to that honesty.
yeah, I completely agree. And the one thing I would add to that is when you're pulling out the individual contributor bullet points, put them on top under each job,
Yes.
right? Make them the
Yes.
first few bullet points, right? Because everyone knows people are looking at resumes, even recruiters, like 15 to 30 seconds, right? So you want to make sure that when they're skimming the first few bullet points and they move on, they see what's relevant. So I
Yeah.
love that. That's a really,
Mhm.
really good point. And then someone said, I love to read. What are your top three book recommendations?
Oh my God, this is actually a really hard question. Every time someone asks me this, I give like 60 answers. I'm gonna say three things that are like more professional based, but if you want to talk about like Toni Morrison or anything, like I'm around. So Atomic Habits, everyone should read it if they haven't read it, or if they have read it, read it again. Changed my life. James Clear, Atomic Habits. This other book I love is called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman. It's like kind of an productivity book. It The central theme of it is like, no matter what you do, you're never going to finish everything. So you might as well kind of like live your life a little bit. So I recommend that book to everyone. It's a little bit of a more dense read. So like buckle up and maybe do an audiobook while you're walking. And then if I had to pick another one, it would either be something by Suzanne Cain, like Bittersweet, the How Sour and Longing Make Us Whole, or Quiet, about introverts, which is how I realized I was even an introvert. Or Gretchen Rubin has a really good book called The Four Tendencies that kind of puts you into an understanding of how you respond to internal and external expectations, and it's kind of a life hack, especially career wise. So I cheated and gave you four, but
I love that. Those just like were top of mind. They must be really good. Oh my gosh, I love
they
that.
are.
I love that so much. I actually have not finished Atomic Habits, and you're like the fifth person to tell me to finish it. So I need to finish
You
it.
need to actually, really quick side note, I was like, I need to read this book because I'm going to be like the best me this year. And I bought it for myself and then forgot I bought it. And like 2 years later, literally 2 years later, went to buy it again. And Amazon was like, you have this on your Kindle already. And I was like, that's embarrassing. So I finally read it.
Hey, at least you're consistent. I love
Yeah,
consistent.
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, awesome. So, next question. In this current environment where there is an abundance of candidates, hiring managers, recruiters may see leadership roles on a resume. Do you have suggestions beyond outlining why one may want to move to an IC that improves positioning to gain an interview? Clearly, networking is the best. However, it is an odd market right now.
Yeah, that's hard because I think people see VP or director and they're just like, wait, why are you applying for a CSM role? Like, this doesn't make any sense. So there's a couple things that I would do. This is like a little bit cheating, and I don't know if it's like technically kosher, but I would actually change the title on your resume to say lead of something. And then when they have a conversation with you, go into detail about what that role was and why you're looking for something else. So titles are tricky. Like, remember when I was I saw a customer success director title at Power Views, and it was actually an IC role. That looked like a manager level title, but it wasn't. And so I would like update the title specifically and talk a little bit about, not, you're not lying, you're not saying you weren't a VP. You might have been a VP, you might have been a director, but you could call it something else. You could say lead, and lead is a little bit more soft when it comes to like screaming in your face that you were in a leadership position. But it is tough when you're just going cold for a resume. I obviously recruit, like networking is going to be the best bet for that. But yeah, it's a hard thing to do. I would adjust the titles. I would highlight some things. I would, again, tailor your resume to that specific role, specifically calling out the IC level things. I use Teal Co. I recommend that all the time, the AI resume builder. I think it's called Teal or Teal HQ, something like that. So that's the best way I could answer that. It is tough. I will say that. I always look at a resume, even if they have those senior level positions, but it is really hard when you're just going in cold.
Yeah, I agree. I love that advice. And the things I would add to that is, like, this is all personal preference, as we know, but I love the summary or objective on top to like
Yes.
have some written story to like why you want to move into this type of role. And then I always recommend that like next to the title, you can, for this, you can maybe put like 40% IC, 60% leadership,
Yeah.
or something like that, or player coach, right? So they
Yeah.
know
Player
that you
coach.
had IC responsibilities if you did, so that just kind of shows them that, hey, like this person still knows how to be in like the day to day. And so I think that also helps
Yeah.
the resume. So that's great. Next question. So I'm in the same position as you were in, someone who is currently a people manager that's looking to go back to being an IC. I appreciate you sharing this because I was really unsure on whether what I was doing was the correct career move. The question is, how do you leverage your people manager experience as an IC when working with clients?
Oh, I
Ooh,
love this. I love
yes.
this. Such a good question. So there's a couple of ways. The first way is that when you're a people manager, you learn how to like coach and guide. I tend to do that with a soft but direct hand. So I'll give feedback directly to customer or to my people. I have leveraged that far and away the most as a people manager skill to an IC role. So when I'm managing customers, I literally coach them as if they were on my team. And I tell them, like, if they're doing something dumb, which customers do dumb stuff all the time. We love them, but they do weird things. Like if they're trying to adapt their process around the tool instead of using the tool for what it actually needs to be done for, I'm really direct with them about how that is. And that skill I was way better at doing that as an IC after I had to manage a team and give constructive feedback. You're essentially giving your customer constructive feedback so that they can reach their goals the same way you would give your team constructive feedback so that they can reach their goals. So that's the first one. The second one is knowing how to speak to leadership. When you're in a manager position, you tend to have more access to leaders. And so you know what your internal leaders care about. Like I know what my CFO cares about. And so I am better at talking to a customer's finance team and CFO because I can relate to what they're talking about because I've had the experience of being in leadership and having to present something that would actually resonate to other leaders. And so I find that being a leader and taking those roles to IC has actually helped a lot with multi-threading on accounts because I know what to say to actually get introduced to other people because it's the kind of things I've had to do to work internally to be a better operator to get projects moved along. So those are the two main things, but the list really goes on, like keeping a level head when things go crazy. That's really important as a leader and it's really critical as an IC. And then time management is also a huge one because leadership time management is different than IC time management, let me tell you. And that was actually something I stumbled on when I went from leadership back to IC because being a CSM is like it's much more faster paced. And so I had to kind of adapt what I did with my calendar and how I kind of moved through my day to take the skills that I learned from like prioritization from leadership and put them in the IC role.
Wow, that was such a good answer. Thank you so much. Love that. Ooh, do you have any podcast recommendations?
Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. Not really. Like I am one of those like old school people. I listen to podcasts, but like not any consistency. I literally just asked one of my friends to recommend podcasts to me because I'm like not a big podcast person. So I don't really listen to very many podcasts. I'm more of like a long form book kind of gal. But if anyone else has podcast recommendations, I am looking to get into it. So please share them.
Yes, please share them in the chat. I agree. I'm also trying to get more into podcasts as well. So I love that.
Mhm.
Okay, great. And then, so I have a few more questions for you. And if anyone
Sure.
else has more questions, please put them in the Q&A. We still have just a few minutes left, so maybe we can get to one or two more. You had answered a couple questions I actually had, but I wanted to understand like what skills are essential for leading from any seat in an organization.
Yeah, I would say, throwing imposter syndrome to the side, this is kind of the anti-skill, like understanding that the things that you have to say are valuable regardless of where you sit in the organization. If you work in an organization where that's not true, that's not a you problem, that's a them problem. Um, Christy Felcher, sorry, I just got distracted by the chat. I haven't listened to her podcast, but I want to. So it's more of a them problem, not a you problem if there's like imposter syndrome going on and people aren't paying attention to what you have to say. So that's one thing. Be confident in the fact that you know what you're talking about. I would say persistence and really tight communication skills are really, really critical. And when I say that, I mean, I once got a really, like, I always have gotten positive performance reviews. The one time I got kind of a negative on my performance review was about communication, which I thought was crazy because I was like, what do you mean? I'm amazing at talking. What are you talking about? But it was actually about the way I structured my communication internally. And so that was really good feedback. Like, choosing to use short bullet points, like giving someone straight to the point, offering someone a solution before you, when you bring a problem, offer potential solutions, even if they're not the ones that we're going to go with, just show that you've thought about it. And that's so like when I recommended that we do a call recording software, I went with the recommendation. I didn't say, hey, we need a call recording software. I said, hey, we need a call recording software. I'd be happy to do the research and put together a proposal. Like that, and that asks the question and answers the question before they have to think about anything. And that kind of thing makes you really valuable org wide, no matter where you work, as someone who comes up with solutions. So being really solutions oriented is also a huge, huge driver of leading from any seat.
Yes, I completely agree. I think when you can go in and like have thought about it a little bit and let's have a conversation starter, that just makes it so much more robust. Um,
Hmm.
Absolutely love that. There is a question about the recording. Yes, this will be recorded. All of our webinars are on our YouTube channel. So within a few days, it will be posted on our YouTube channel. What is the most inspiring piece of advice you have received about career growth and leadership?
Most inspiring piece of advice. I think I would have to say that like not not taking things personally is a huge thing. I think when you're in a leadership position or when you're in an IC role and something goes sideways with a customer, I have been told that like when I was much younger in my career, it was like it is almost never about you, right? Especially when you're in a leadership position. Sometimes it's about you. Sometimes you mess up, that happens, and you need to take ownership about it. But there's so many things outside of your control as a leader. And so really paying attention to like what you can actually control in your purview is going to make your life so much easier because if you come down at the number one thing I coach new leaders on is being really hard on themselves because they feel like they failed, if their team didn't do this and that and the other. And that's not going to get you anywhere. That's not productive. It's just going to make you spiral. And so the best piece of advice I got was like, this is almost always not about you and almost always like, don't take yourself too seriously. Like just do the things that you need to be doing and be good to your team and don't come down hard on yourself. That is like, I mean, that's advice for life, I guess, not just leadership, but yeah, I would say that. And it's not, I wouldn't even call it inspiring. I would call it like, duh, like, of course, we've got to do this, right? Otherwise, we're not going to survive it.
Life advice from Arit. That should be the next podcast. You should just create a
Oh my
podcast.
gosh, yes. I've got so much advice.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you. And I'm gonna just we might have time for one more question, so I'm gonna do that. Um, okay, yeah, I'm gonna end with this. So, what emerging trends in the tech industry should CS professionals be aware of when considering their next career move?
Oh my God, AI. It's the answer for everything, right? Like it's got to be AI because CS has such the opportunity to shape the way it's used in CS versus having it thrown upon us. And I think that is like I was just talking about how I need to dive deeper into AI because that is it could be a bubble, right? People don't really know what's going on. Like there's a lot of different ways that we could approach it. But I think becoming savvy about where those trends are going, being up to speed on what kind of tools might influence CS roles, This is especially true because the more that we move forward in it, the more it's going to become a requirement in terms of what you know how to do. Like people are going to care if you know how to like write good prompts for AI. That's going to become a job requirement for CS soon, if it's not already. It's already coming up over and over again, and your customers are going to be asking about AI too. And so you need to at least be conversant in what AI trends there are, the capabilities, a little bit of quick and dirty on how it actually works, which I have a really beautiful visual that I can share with you if anyone wants to see it, if you're a visual learner.
Yeah.
AI, be up to speed on it, know how to talk about it, at least conversant wise, and understand how it might kind of really revolutionize the industry.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love that. I think the people that are growing with AI are going to be the future.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Eric, today for your time and your energy and your advice and your stories. It was so valued and so heard, and we had a very captivated audience. So I really, really appreciate you. This will be recorded. This can be watched over and over again and be shared in the next few days on our YouTube channel. Let me know if anybody has any questions. Eric, thank you so much for your time today. I am so excited to partner with you again in the future. And we'll see everybody really soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.